So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's program organized by Friends of India Society International. I'm Vivek Sinha, one of the General Secretaries of FISHI, welcoming you to this great conference on one of the most important issues which is impacting world Indian community at large. The Friends of India Society International has conducted seminars, workshops, and presentations by distinguished persons on matter of India and the world at large. Friends of India Society International plans to educate the Friends of India all over the world in support of India causes and the world togetherness. In this series, we have a very dynamic presentation on a very good topic by Mr. Parag Khanna. Today's topic is People on the Move, the Future of Global Indians. As we start the program, please mute yourself throughout as well as during the Q&A. Please note to leave your question with your name in the chat box. I'll be presenting as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. At this time, I have the pleasure to present to you our esteemed leader, the International President of Friends of India Society International, Dr. Bhishma Agnihotri. Dr. Agnihotri has a long list of accomplishments and credentials to his credit. He served as the first person of Indian origin to lead an American law school and was dean and chancellor for the longest tenure in American law schools. He served various organizations in the service of the community at large. Dr. Agnihotri was appointed as the first ambassador at large by the government of India in 2001. He traveled the world in strengthening the ties of NRIs from all backgrounds, gender, and religion to our motherland, India. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Bhishma Agnihotri.
Thank you very much for all this. Some unnecessary mentioning of my so-called accomplishments. Here we are today to talk about another person. I hope I'm right what I'm talking about, but if my memory is straight, I met Dr. Parag Khanna, I could call it Parag, about 21 years ago, right?
That's exactly right.
Oh, yeah. Okay, 21 years ago, what happened? This is, I cannot see his face. Anyway, 21 years ago, when he was not 44, now he is 44. And one thing is strange, that in this small time, for 21 all the way up to her, he has done so much. It's unbelievable. I remember when he saw me in my office in New York, and he was, as usual, as now he is, polite, nice person, but with a great mission. He had mentioned to me, if he remembers it, I remember it, that what our plans were, what he was doing at that time, and what more he plans to do for the world at large. And I was totally impressed, to be honest. That's why I remember him. I've seen tons of people in life, but I remember him. I remember his face. He looks the same, by the way. I've seen him after 20 plus years, 21, 22 years, but he looks the same. But I read his books off and on because of his name, because I knew him. But of course, then I started reading his books, and I invited him one times before for some other group. I think he couldn't make it. But I was thrilled and pleasantly pleased that he went on to accomplish his missions. He wanted to be an internationalist. He wanted to serve the country, the world, and everybody else around him. And he did it, by the way. And he has done so much, it's difficult to see how a person can do so much in terms of writing books after books, good books, international books, books of vision, book of some sort of, some disputes also here and there, international field. And I don't want to talk about too much about this because I know some of you, not most of you, have the details of his accomplishments, and others who don't have, they must have read them as usual. But his publications are great, and he has been running think tank for many people. And so he was a trendsetter. Of course, he's a great writer. He's a great thinker, and he's a good friend of friends. And he is still young, by the way, if I compare my age with him. So if I can talk the way I'm talking, he can spell the world over of plus or minus when he's of my age. So therefore, I don't want to say more than that, but that's a great honor for me personally. And I'm happy that he could make it. And we had wonderful speakers and he is another gem we have with us. So without talking too much about him, and I would like to talk about the programs he's doing, the things he's doing, the topic we have, and anything else he would like to talk about. Okay? Okay, Parag, go ahead now.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Agnihotri. Thank you, Vivek. It's such a pleasure to join you. And I'm delighted at your very firm memory of our encounters over the years. And of course, as the term global Indian, was alien really to many people until you took to the scene with your pioneering role as the diaspora became larger, became more prominent, and now is really snowballed, expanded into something that is such a robust community. So I'm honored and proud and delighted to be just one member of that. And this new book that I wrote, Move, is the first time, not the first time that I'm writing about diaspora. It's not the first time that I'm writing about the Indian diaspora, but the first time that I was able to take advantage of the large data sets that we have available about the demographic picture of the world, the footprint of diaspora populations such as India, and to make projections around how significant it will be as a global demographic and economic force in the world, and to make all of these things concrete. So that's what I aspire to do with this book. And one of the most sort of surprising, realizations in a way to me was just how significantly expanded the Indian diaspora is, how much more global it has become, it's the weight that it carries, in contrast to, and this is really the key thing, in contrast to the trends in much of the rest of the world. We have grown up in an age where the Chinese diaspora is larger. Now the Indian diaspora will be larger in our lifetimes. We've grown up at a time when the world population was exploding, but now in our lifetimes, the world population will plateau. And so all of these background conditions are very significant in shaping the movement of people and the geography of people. So I had the opportunity to write this chapter titled "The Future is Brown." The Future is Brown is actually the title of it. And I looked at the combined South Asian population, more than 1.8 billion people. Again, the combined diaspora sizes, nearly 50 plus million people. And then looking at the geopolitics of the world embracing India in so many ways, not just as a counterweight to China, but in its own right. And looking at how that leads to growing bilateral people-to-people ties with India. Then looking at the labor shortages of advanced economies from North America to Europe to Japan, and the demand for Indian professionals in information technology and medicine and so forth. And each of these variables, each of these factors becomes a driver of the global Indian population expanding and expanding and expanding. And then you have the technology of the internal communications, you have the payment system of India Stack, and that potentially combining with remittances to create an even larger financial ecosystem among global Indians and the global India. So I see such enormous potential in the coming 10 or 20 years to build on the foundations that many of you have built in terms of organizing the diaspora. Now is the time for it to actually have and even stronger coherence and even stronger agency. So I wanted to deal with all of these things analytically and put them in the context of the global demographic picture, the global strategic picture. So it was really a great privilege, a great fun, and a great coincidence, really, to be able to contextualize these things in this book about the future of human geography, because really, the people of South Asia will define the future of human geography. Let me say one more word about this when it comes to demographics, and that is the role of youth. When you're writing about the future, when you are a so-called futurist, you have to be looking at young people, the demographics of young people, the geography of young people, the behavior of young people, the habits, the ideologies, the identity of young people. And what I found more and more is not only are young people, of course, they consider mobility a human right, connectivity a human right, sustainability a human right, but just more fundamentally than that, the future of the world population will be driven by young Asian people, because the birth rates have fallen so rapidly everywhere else in the world. And whereas they continue to be steady, particularly in South Asia. So you could literally go so far as to say that the future of humanity depends on Asian youth, and particularly South Asian youth. That's not some kind of a rhetorical statement, not something to pat ourselves on the back, not a sort of rah kind of thing. That's actually an analytical fact. And that is the broader context, the deeper context, the insight, or the point of departure, I think, for a much bigger conversation, of course, about what it means to be a member of the Indian diaspora today, because actually you represent a future population that is an ever larger share of all of humankind. And that's the big picture that we're dealing with, the big picture that we're grappling with over the next 10, 20, 30 years. But I tell you, it is an amazing time for people who are young people, young Desis, young Indians, wherever you are. It's an amazing time to be a talented young Indian, because the world is your oyster. Every country needs you, wherever you may be. India needs you, of course, as well, but the rest of the world needs you too. So it's quite a different world, quite an improved set of conditions, you might say. So let me just pause there. Those are just some opening thoughts and reflections, and I look forward to our conversation.
So I guess the question is based on the kind of picture what you are presenting right now for the, I don't know, I don't want to call it human evolution, but how the South Asian youngs are going to dominate the world. So what are the specific traits you see in these South Asian origin people which will really dominate the world?
Well, the trait is more difficult to answer. The demographics, as I made clear, that's very robust, very significant. But the traits you could break down in several ways. For example, how many are male versus female? What I've witnessed and what I actually write about in the book is young Indian women, young Indian professional women who I've seen working in technology companies in Europe, for example. Then I also write about Indian farmers and construction workers in Russia and Kazakhstan, Indian doctors, Indian nurses. One of the points I make is that actually, if you look at the shortage of nurses and doctors in the advanced economies, we should be opening up even more medical training centers and nurse training centers, because the Philippines cannot possibly produce enough nurses and caregivers to service the demand of the world. I actually talk about the war. There's a war among countries to lure, to attract, to recruit Filipino nurses. Well, why is there not a war to recruit Indian nurses, right? So in all of these professions, we have India has the demographic advantage, and even the potential professional training, the vocational training advantage. So if you imagine investing more fiscally and through the diaspora in investing in that capacity, in that training, it could really be a huge service to the world.
Please, I think this program is conversational. So if anyone wants to bring any question or point or relating to the issue, somebody raised the hand. Who is this? Mohanji, yes, please. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Very interesting observations, Parag Khanna. My name is Mohan. I was looking into some of the data, and there is 60%, as of 2021, the 60% of the world population comprises of Asians, which goes with what you are talking about today. But you are giving some emphasis to Indian population. But when I look at Indian population, it is 29% compared to 71% of Chinese people. How do you see the influence of Chinese people in the overall world population, where the Indian people and their performances are concerned?
It's a very good question. Now, we have to remember that even though the Chinese diaspora is still larger than the Indian diaspora, it's mostly concentrated in East Asia, in the Pacific Rim. You have the Chinese, ethnic Chinese populations of Malaysia, of Thailand, of Indonesia, of course, of Singapore, and other countries. But when it comes to the global workforce, especially the professional workforce, the OECD countries, again, North America, Europe, Japan, already today, you have 3 million plus Indians in the OECD countries' workforce. You have only 2 million Chinese in the OECD workforce. So in other words, yes, China's diaspora is larger, but China's diaspora is mostly in Asia, located in Greater China, whereas Indians are geographically much more global and already 50% more significant, already today, 50% more significant than Chinese in the professional workforce of mature economies, of developed economies. So that's a very, very significant reality. And of course, given that India is much younger than China, much younger in terms of median income, the future international workforce is much more likely to be Indian than Chinese.
But one more follow-up question to that, then I will close. You're right in terms of numbers, but I came to this country 25 years ago. I saw much less Chinese population compared to Indian population. Indian population was moving or immigrating to America in around post-60s in a major way. But I have seen an explosion of Chinese people coming into America and other countries that you mentioned. So that trend can continue. So in 10 years, probably this 2 million, 3 million comparison can change dramatically. Do you think so?
Well, I think, again, the transition is happening on a number of levels. One is the median age, where I said India is much younger. The other is the global dimension, which is to say that Indians are now more in demand, more welcome. I haven't even yet mentioned geopolitics. The geopolitical suspicions of China are making it such that many Chinese are returning to China, retreating to China. They don't feel welcome. There is, of course, a whole lot of suspicion of their intellectual property theft, espionage activities, and so forth. No such fate, fortunately, is affecting Indians wherever they are. So the geopolitical dimensions, the age dimensions, the language dimensions, the skill sets that one studies in the Indian institutions and so forth, all of those play a very, very significant role in this. And all of those areas that I just mentioned, every one of them is an area of growing demand, an area of rising labor shortages, an area where countries, if we look at Europe, for example, if Europe wants to achieve its strategic objectives to have competitive industries, IT, robotics, all of the clean energy, all of these areas where it currently has deficits of labor, how will it do those things without Indians?
Thank you, Mr. Khanna. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohanji. I think Madan ji has some thoughts. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, I did.
Okay, yes, you are.
Excellent talk, Paragji. That's wonderful. My question is, how much of the Indian culture will survive in the 21st century? If you compare with China, even though the numbers may be smaller than Indians at the present time who are migrating to the US, there are many Chinatowns in the United States. California and San Francisco, some of the other major cities on the Eastern Coast. I know one or two in America, India Bazaar in India Central, like in Chicago or maybe in New York City. But will the Indians lose their ethnic identification, Hinduism, if you want to be somewhat more specific, compared to some other nationalities?
I don't think so. I don't think that the way that we should measure cultural coherence or sustenance is whether you have physical Chinatowns or do not have physical Chinatowns. Because Indian populations are much better at assimilating, you will, by design, not have as many exclusive India towns, as you will have Chinatowns. So what the Chinese do is what the Chinese do, and what the Indians do is what the Indians do. The Chinese model is not a model for Indians, right? The Chinese way is the Chinese way. And of course, being assimilated and assimilating better than the others is more of a strength and a weakness, of course. So you cannot, on the one hand, have ethnic ghettos, and on the other hand, assimilate. You cannot have both, right? Between the two, Indians should always choose to assimilate, right? And especially in English-speaking countries, of course, that becomes, more possible. But then there's a valid question about culture, cultural continuity. But that happens in many, many other ways. As far as I can tell, the growing numbers themselves allow for a robustness of the communities. Secondly, the community associations, whether they are religious, whether they're cultural, whether they are sort of fostering Hindu identity, or whether they're simply more cultural, ethnic in nature and celebrating, communalism, communal identity. That is growing in prominence all across the United States. You can clearly see it in city after city, town after town. I see the rise of more such organizations. So I think we should focus on these civic organizations and less so on the geographic spaces. And I think that that's the way that Indians will do things. And I think that's okay.
Thank you, Madanji.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants to have any observation, question?
Yeah, hi. Hi, my name is Mohit Vij. Parag, thanks for being here. So one question is, you kind of touched on this topic about slightly about the managers in India itself. We feel it's like most of the people who do well, or there's almost like you feel that anybody who starts doing well in India almost inadvertently leaves India. We can say, no, there are still smart people there, but when you go there, there's almost a dearth of good managers there. So the kind of labor markets, the kind of population or the professional growth we're seeing, it's also almost in India is only happening at a very lower strata of the society. The way we see it, it's like the managers are not. We're losing the good managers. We're losing the professionals. Even those who are in India are actually end up serving the multinationals. So how does that impact the progress in India itself?
Well, actually, I think it's very hard to generalize. Remember that there are so many Indians, so many Indian immigrants in so many different places, that we can't say that it's only the higher skilled, only the lower skilled. What we see is pairs of countries, right? Pairs of countries. And with different pairs of countries, you have different, strata, socioeconomically or skills. If you look at Canada, for example, Canada's explicit policy is to target highly skilled migrants. That is the pathway. They have a points-based system. You log in online and you are assessed according to their criteria. And they're looking for younger skilled people, IT professionals. In the year 2019, Canada let in almost as many Indians as the United States did, even though Canada's population is 1/10 America's population. And of course, they're focusing on the software programmers, the engineers, and so forth. But then if you look at the Gulf countries, it's of course a mix, right? In the Gulf countries, you have plenty of wealthy Indian businessmen and industrialists and so forth, but you obviously also have the largest group of migrant laborers in construction and other sectors of any country or pair of countries in the world. So what you see is a lot of everything. The truth is, it's a lot of a lot. It's a lot of everything across the board. It isn't one or the other, just high skilled, just low skilled. And that's just a commentary on the present state of affairs. If we look at the future, let's remember that I have characterized a situation where you have a huge demand for skilled South Indian professionals, again in IT, medicine, and so forth. But you also have a huge demand for the unskilled or semi-skilled as well. In fact, I write about the demand for Indian farmers in Russia, Indian construction workers in Kazakhstan, and so on and so forth. So I think we'll continue to see across income levels, across professional categories, and across geographies, a diverse composition of Indians who move abroad. And let's remember, one can move abroad unskilled, but gain skills, for example, along the way. You could move to one country and then to another country for different reasons. So I think that these are very dynamic and fluid categories as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I have
that.
another question.
I think Mohitji has a follow-up question.
The question is,
Sure.
you've done a very good job in indicating high-level professionals coming to America and the rest of the world. I'm wondering if the increasing size and influence of the Indian young people coming to America, would that translate somehow or at all better relations between India and America at the governmental level? It doesn't seem to be that way. I don't think the Indian community exercises any positive influence on the way the American government or society really perceives India. If you look at New York Times, Washington Post, they usually tend to be very critical. So what's your take on that?
It's a great question. I think very often we have tried to make a connection between national interest, international strategic relations, and people-to-people ties and diasporas. And the truth is that it doesn't always work that way. For in both directions. The America's perception of its national interest, for example, will forever be against nuclear proliferation. So when India conducted the nuclear tests in 1998, it was not going to be received well, even if there were 10 times more Indians in the United States in 1998 than there were in 1998, right? There's no way, right? And now today, let's look at the other direction. India has a very strong self-perception of its national interest, right? Just because it now enjoys relatively closer relations with the United States, that doesn't mean that it is going to declare itself an ally of America, even if you have more or less Indians. Even if you have Kamala Harris as vice president, she's of course critical of the human rights situation in India. And India is going to say, yes, we will do business with you in America. Yes, we will buy weapons with you. Yes, we will join the Quad formation with you. But we will also buy missiles from Russia. We will also buy aircraft from Russia. We will do business with Russia. We'll have our own dealings with Japan. We will pursue our relations with Iran, and so on and so on. So the national interest for decision makers, for strategic leaders, is always going to be their main responsibility. And the demographic issue of the diaspora domestically is something that may have an influence on sentiment, but may not ultimately make a big difference in actual policy. Also, the third reason is that remember that the diaspora itself is not unified, right, in its views. In the United States today, you have Indians who are very critical of the Modi government, and you have Indians who are very supportive of the Modi government. It's not like the United Kingdom, where in the UK, you have a much stronger pro-government position among the diaspora, right? And this is fairly well documented. So in the United Kingdom, you may have a greater uniformity of diaspora views about the desire for a strategic alignment with India, right? In the United States, it's not that clear. And it's a genuinely divided, divisive, and contentious issue on intellectual, emotional, political grounds. Because America is like that. It is more diverse. Indians are split between Democrat and Republican. So we have to treat each country in each situation in its own way.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
a follow-up, but if you compare with a couple of other groups, they seem to do much better. Of course, you can always cite the case of the Jewish population. They have so much influence in terms of the American government policies towards Israel. And even the Muslims seem to do much better. Islamophobia is a US government policy. The congressman and government officials always seem to be talking about the danger of Islamophobia. But recently there has been some discussion about Hinduphobia. But I don't know if any of the government officials or the congressmen have latched onto that there's such a thing as Hinduphobia. So as a group, even though we are large in number, and I agree with you, we tend to be divided. Indians are not unified like some of the other nationalities might be. But compared to the influence that the Muslims who have migrated to this country, or the traditional, of course, the Jewish lobby, we seem to do very poorly.
Well, lobbying is not a matter of number. It's a matter of coherence and focus. And the example that you give of the Israeli Jewish diaspora is a good example. Single issue, very concentrated, a lot of money, coherent minority, deep linkages between the Israeli state and the diaspora population here. So, in some specific issues, for example, getting the nuclear agreement passed, is an example where the Indian diaspora was very active, very focused, pushed very hard, lobbied Congress and this kind of thing. So these sorts of things, in an issue by issue basis, you can have success. But clearly the Israeli lobby has been around a long time, and again is very focused in that way. There too, you're starting to see fissures and ruptures and differences of opinion. Clearly, there's a lot of contention there. Another example is the Eastern European diasporas. The most successful, diaspora act, one of them, and it's a major case study in the last 20, 30 years, was the Eastern European diasporas that lobbied for the expansion of NATO. The Polish diaspora, concentrated in Chicago and around the country, and other Eastern European countries. When NATO was considering expansion, the NATO organization in the late 1990s, there was a huge debate. I was in college at the time, and we were having this debate in our classrooms. Should NATO expand, or will that alienate Russia? Should we do it in any way? And it was the diaspora that played a massive role. But again, how did it work? There was a single issue, right? Single issue. They were not saying, let's just improve ties. It's just better to have better ties. No, one issue, one focus, all of the money, all of the attention, all of the lobbying on that one issue. So I think the test for the Indian diaspora maybe is there one single issue? Is it a free trade agreement? Is it immigration reform? The lifting the H-1B quota. Now, even if you make the best effort, there is still a possibility that you will not succeed. This is a democratic country that's meant to govern itself. It's not obligated to heed the whims and then the viewpoints of the diaspora. The purpose of American politicians and the American government is to serve the American state and American society, not to serve the Indian diaspora. So we have to be clear that you will not always succeed. So even if you have a singular push on expanding the H-1B visa quota, it doesn't mean you will succeed if you have a Republican government that is hell-bent on reducing immigration, right? If the mood of the country, if the mood of the politicians in power, if the mood of the ruling party is anti-immigrant, then you will not win that battle at that point in time. But you can wait for the next government. And look what's happened. Biden has come in, and Biden does want to expand the H-1B, right? So I think that it's the right issue at the right time and the focus. Simply talking about good ties, bad ties, that's not enough. In politics, it's all about focus.
Thank you, Madanji.
Just one more follow-up. I'm sorry.
I think there are other questions. If you, please.
Compared to other ethnic groups, would you observe that Indians tend to be more niggardly, more miserly when it comes to contributing for social, political causes, that we don't pull our weight? Individually, we are very affluent. As it has been repeated, we are on the top of the economic ladder. But socially, we don't pull our weight because we don't contribute financially or in terms of time as a group compared to others.
Well, again, the composition of each group is different, and the ways in which they contribute. And by the way, my opinion is that lobbying is not exactly a social contribution, right? Lobbying is a political activity aimed at enhancing leverage over a specific political decision. It could be that Indians do a tremendous amount for their own community in terms of nurturing the culture, nurturing welfare, supporting civic causes, but do nothing for the international, lobbying effort and diplomatic effort. It could be. I'm just saying, as a hypothetical, it could be that you focus a lot on the domestic, but very little on the international, or you focus a lot on the international and not as much on the domestic. That you give generously in one area, but not in another area. So I don't know if comparisons here are very useful, because I think the aims are different, the needs are different, right? There is not a Indian underclass ghettoization in America where that needs to be some gigantic focus of Indian charity causes in the diaspora, right? There's a localized need, and there's communities that give that money locally to cater to those needs. And I think that's, of course, a very wonderful charitable thing to do. But it's not like a Latino population or, other populations that are desperately in need of that kind of support. So I think, we have different, we should focus only on what are the specific issues related to the Indian diaspora domestically in America, in Canada, whatever the case may be. And what support, do they need? And are they getting enough of it? And I think that's really the correct barometer. In this particular issue that you're raising, I don't think that comparisons are necessarily that helpful.
Thank you, Madanji. Dr. Purohit, were you asking something?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Dr. Purohit.
It was a nice talk, Gyan. A couple of things I have that you said that Indian diaspora will be more in number and around the world. And it's true that, that we are going around the world and where we are needed. And I think the best thing which happens with the Indians is they can speak English very well. So they can fit into most of the countries pretty well, especially in this country. I look into the medical profession because we can express ourselves medically much better to our patient than like a Chinese or other people. So I think that is the advantage we have on that part in the whole world, because English is spoken everywhere in the world. And I think we are pretty much good in that part. So I think I can tell you about the medical profession. We need doctors now in this country. We are short of the doctors. We are short of the nurses. We are short of the people who work on the floor, on the wards. So I think these people will be needed more and more. People in the medical profession are retiring very early. So there'll be much more need for the Indian doctors because they are very well wanted. They present themselves very well. I think that our profession has really done a great thing in this country. And we are a good number of the physicians in all the specialties in this research as well as in the medical, clinical, cardiology. You can say any branch where the Indian doctors are not there. And they are very well needed and they are very well respected at this time. And I think that if the trend continues that way, I think that Indians will be all over the world, will be well respected. And I think in all the professions, not only the physicians, but engineers, IT, and all these people are needed in the whole world. I agree on that part very well because you have presented very well on that part. And I'm sure that also the labor class will be needed all over the world, because if you look at the thing in Germany, in France, and all these areas, they want the people there to do the work because they cannot do their work because population is getting old as well, and in different countries, especially Chinese. The Chinese restricted their population, and now they are getting old. I think the India will definitely surpass the China, because India will be the younger population. That is, but if it is used in the, we go in the right direction rather than hodgepodge, because we will be the young country, and I think will be needed. And if we collectively or somehow that we go in the right direction together, and that will be the main thing. Other thing I just wanted to ask you, there was some studies, so I was reading about it, that in 2050, India will be the Muslim country, because the way the population is increasing, the Muslim from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from Malaysia. He gave the statistics, one person who was doing it. Is that true? Is that going to happen?
Sure. Can we, I unfortunately have to go relatively soon. Maybe we can group the final questions together and then I'll take them all together.
Okay.
I just like to say the point made that Indians are much better in facility of English language. That's true. Japanese and the Chinese have so much harder time. There are two reasons for that. One, of course, India was colonized by the British, and a lot of the education institutions function in the English language. And the other is that Indian languages are part of the Indo-European language family. They're very much related together. I spent some time in Japan. Students who had been studying English language for years together couldn't really communicate in the English language. English comes just so much easier to Indians because Indian languages are part of the same family.
Thank you.
And so, we have a bit of an advantage.
Sureshji, do you have any question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Thanks for your talk, but I have a different perspective. Let me tell you why I have a different perspective. What we see data today is the result of 10, 20, or 30 years when people came at that time from India, and they were highly qualified. I teach electrical engineering courses, and I have seen the number of Indian students declining rapidly in the department, and that number being replaced by Chinese students. I have also seen in College of Engineering, the number of Indian faculty declining, and the reason I see not many students do PhD, they just finish their masters and hit the job. So that faculty number is declining. In my department, we used to be 8 or 9 Indian professors, maybe 15 years ago. Now we are only 2. So I see the trend in a different direction because Chinese students are now more focused towards their English language proficiency, and there is a lot of difference between a Chinese students of today and a Chinese students 20 years or 15 years ago.
Very
Can we ask a couple of questions? I think we can,
Yes.
I think Parag has limited time, so let's make sure we ask questions from Parag, and then we can also continue our discussion. So Parag, a quick question is, if it's okay, if there's nobody else in line first.
This is Gaurang. If you have a minute, I will ask a quick question also.
Sure.
The quick question is, people are on the move, as you said, Indians, but how do we harness and provide a cohesive voice? Meaning there are a lot of people coming to US, but how do we make sure that they are speaking in one voice to further the real goal? More practical question.
Okay. Was there a last question also?
One of the things I want to ask is that, we keep talking about it's almost India is becoming a labor supplier at whatever tier. We can talk lower tiers, we can talk professionals, but it's literally a kind of labor supplier to the world. But you said it's okay to have like a cultural dissolution. I would say, basically it doesn't matter if we bring the cultural signature to where we go. And then also, in that sense, how does it help India? Because we're not creating, if we're producing software IT engineers, but we're not creating any software products. There's nothing that's built in India. Same thing with hardware chips. We're creating Pentium chips here, but we have single chips being built in India. So how is it helping India? All these people, it's helping the Indians who are going out of India. But how does it help India?
Great. Okay. Let me take all of these questions one by one. In terms of sort of India as a labor provider, but not necessarily helping India itself. I think that it's a more diffuse story than that. If you look, of course, at remittances, India is the largest recipient of remittances in the world. So an economy is not defined purely as some kind of endogenous activity only within the country. If the Indian way, the Indian economy, the greater Indian economy, is with robust international capital inflows, from the diaspora, then that's fine. That's part of the system. And so the more Indians go abroad and the more remittances they go back, that they send back, the more it contributes overall to India. In terms of innovation, if you look at India Stack is now a model that the rest of the world will want to emulate. Most developing countries in the world would want to have an India Stack, an India payment system, an Aadhaar style of Indian identification system. It's a heroic innovation. There's no question that it is not somehow subordinate in some way. It, of course, we're not talking about quantum computing. We're talking about innovation of sort of standardized technologies to a public policy area. But it is an incredible, breakthrough and achievement that India has that other countries do not have, and it is the envy of much of the developing world. So I would count that as innovation as well, even if it is not scientific invention. The capacity for scientific invention will come as a result of research and development, that will come as a consequence of wealth. And India does not yet have that per capita wealth, does not have that size of budget. But eventually as it gets there, it will. Now, wherever Indian minds are contributing to those causes, there is a feedback loop. There is a return on investment in the sense that these technologies do filter back to India in some way, shape, or form, in the course of time. And we've seen that with IT. We see that with many other areas as well, medicine, and so on. So I think we have to have a kind of holistic view about that and not say, well, India is just exporting its best lines and no invention is happening in India. It's what Indians do. And if Indians are accelerating the cause of technological advancement globally, that's also accelerating the cause of those technologies making their way physically back into India. And I think that's also important in the context of this issue of Indian versus Chinese academics. Remember that China has a much larger middle class. So we have a far larger number of Chinese students that have made it abroad to England, to Canada, to the United States. But as the Indian middle class expands, you'll start to have more Indians able to afford that international education and join those student bodies in the elite universities at larger and larger numbers. And hopefully to have that level of focus and accomplishment that you've described of the Chinese academics. Again, it's not a race, right? It's not a race. Chinese will never have the number of technology company CEOs that Indians will have, right? Literally never. I think we can safely say that there is zero chance of any other country's diaspora ever having a meaningful fraction of the number of technology CEOs that India has. So there are strengths, there's accomplishments of some, cultures and others. There are going to be more Chinese scientists winning Nobel Prizes for a while. Eventually, more Indians will win some. I think it's going to be again, it's not everything is a race. So we've spoken about the Indian Chinese academics, Indian technology. Let me talk about India speaking with one voice. Let me ask just rhetorically, but I don't mean this facetiously. If Indians don't speak with one voice in India, why would you expect them to speak with one voice anywhere else in the world? We're not the kind of people who speak with one voice. We're the most ethnically, linguistically diverse society in the history of humanity and in the present of humanity. So how could one conceivably even impose this kind of idea? Even the idea itself, it's a convenient political desire and ambition, but it's not a realistic one by any stretch. And let's remember how divided the Chinese are. The Chinese, to the extent that they come from mainland China, not from Taiwan, not from Hong Kong, come from an authoritarian country, but they're extremely divided between those who are, loyal to the Communist Party and to the authoritarian expansionist mission of the People's Republic of China, and those who are exiled from that state and desperately want to, support any and all measure to bring down that regime. So we will never have this kind of, singular cultural or ideological or intellectual coherence, and nor should we, because I don't know what that would look like, and I would be afraid, if it were not my opinion, what that opinion is. So on the one hand, I think we should celebrate our vast footprint across many different disciplines and domains of life. And we should certainly aspire that in particular specific issues where we can agree that India would benefit from a higher H-1B quota with America, free trade agreement with America, whatever the case, whatever the agenda is, if there's sufficient consensus and agreement, go for it. But let's not presume that all Indians can or will or must speak with one voice across the world in each country, because that doesn't happen even in model United Nations, role playing. It will not happen in the real world, where we have more opinions than ever before. And of course, that is the nature of democracy, whether it is Indian democracy, whether it's American democracy. So the final question was on the Muslim population. It could be that numerically, there will be a statistically larger number of people who identify as Muslim in India versus the total number of people in Pakistan or the total number of Muslims in Indonesia, whether it's 200 million, whether it's 250 million, whether you're talking about the year 2040 or 2050. To be honest, who knows? Because it sort of reminds me of the clash of civilizations argument made famous by Samuel Huntington, more than 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago, actually. The truth is there is no cohesiveness to Muslim identity. There's certainly more cohesion to Hindu identity than there is to Muslim identity, because Islam is geographically so sprawling, much more so than Hinduism. So whether it's a larger number of Muslims than live in Indonesia or a larger number of Muslims than live in Pakistan, I don't see that as material. It's already a very large number, and that number is growing. And that number will continue to grow. Maybe it will grow fast. Maybe it will not grow as fast. Indian fertility is actually declining across the board in lockstep with urbanization and with rising wealth. Maybe many Muslims will stay in India. Maybe many Muslims will leave India. Who knows? But one thing is for sure, there is not a coherence, such that it is a singular political agency. There are Muslims who support the BJP. There are Muslims who are afraid and fearful of the BJP. Right? It depends. We cannot assume a linearity to politics and a linearity to culture. I think these things actually blend in a much more diffuse kind of way. I personally don't think that it's good to alienate any percentage of your population, whether it's large or whether it's small. So that is how I would be conducting my public policy and my politics as Prime Minister of India in a very inclusive fashion as much as possible, because I would seek to maximize the human capital of the society. I would seek to maximize the contribution that every single person makes and to conduct as little marginalization as possible. So I'm not talking about Muslims, I'm talking about anyone, quite frankly, because that is how I would govern in a utilitarian fashion. again, consistent with what has been India's largely secular governance identity in the post-independence decades. Now, we may or may not ever go back to those times. There will be a future, only you cannot go back to the past. But in the future, I hope that whoever is governing, whatever party it is, I hope that they're focused on the utilitarian governance of the country and maximizing human capital, because that's ultimately how you have a successful state. It's how you have a wealthy state, a stable state, prosperous state, and it's how, of course, you have a diaspora with a much greater sense of pride in what that state has accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Purohit, would you want to say a word of thanks, or Dr. Agnihotri?
Yes, I think I can say that it was a wonderful talk, and we really enjoyed it in a different perspective you said. And I think a lot of things which you said that very practical. And I think we all enjoyed your talk, and it was a good thing that we had a question and answers, and it was more like a discussion of the topics. So it was a variety of the topics, and I think I agree that India has a great future, as well as India inside as well as outside. And I think that's what we are looking for. And I think we are all the ambassadors. Initially, when I came in, and they used to call me as a brain drain, and now they're calling me the brain bank. So I think India realized that people who went outside, that is a bank. And I think we prosper outside, we prosper in India. I think India future is great, and I agree on that part. Thank you. Thanks very much for such a nice discussion we had, and for your talk.
Bhishmji.
Thank you all. It was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Bhishmji wants to say a few words, please.
I'll just take 1 minute. It's wonderful. I knew you were going to grow that much, but it's unbelievable. Your total analysis is so wonderful, great. I don't want to add on, but I want to say the person who just spoke before me, Surendra Purohitji, he is the president of our organization in America, okay? And also, he is the president of so many organizations in API. API is American Physicians Organization. So we have worked together under that organization. I was their advisor, and he was running the show also there. So we were together on that brain too. But anyway, nice to see you, Parag. Let us talk again, and you are wonderful. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, Parag.
Take care. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that was good.
Yes,
That was a very good program.
absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah.